He was crouching over my bed while wearing my clothes. I found this thread in 2014, and I've obsessed with it ever since. And I can't believe I didn't think about posting my own story on here sooner. Just as a reference, this happened almost 2 months ago to this day. I think it's worth mentioning that, while this story takes place in the Southeast Asian city, with a population of a little over 1.5 million, I don't always live here. I was born and raised in a small town in the Midwestern United States, you know, the kind where everybody knows everyone, and we only get attention during an election year. Anyways, my parents and I made the big move in 2014 due to a number of reasons, the biggest one being so my mother could be with her family, since this is her homeland. However, the town where all my relatives live is 8 hours away. We had to move to our city because it's the safest in the region for foreigners, and my dad is a pretty obvious white man. Now, unlike every other college student in the world, I hadn't done much this summer. The heat was blistering all hours of the day, and I didn't have money to spend even if I was willing to leave our air-conditioned apartment. The only thing enticing me to the outdoors were the incessant sounds of construction due to a new unit being added to our complex. However, leaving was obviously inevitable, so towards the end of the month, my parents and I went to buy groceries. The next day, my mom and I went to buy some things we had initially forgotten, and the day after that, the two of us went out again to pay some bills. That made 3 consecutive days of going out for the first time in literally a month. To say I was exhausted was an understatement. By 7 p.m. on the third night, I was already fast asleep on the living room couch. My mom woke up around 10 that same night and told me to head up to my room. I was too tired to do my entire night routine, so I quickly brushed my teeth and went upstairs. I noticed that my cat was already asleep in my bed, which happens once in a blue moon since he's basically my mom's shadow. So I got into bed while contorting myself at an angle that would not disturb him. Cat lovers, you know what I'm talking about. I turned on a dim light, plugged in my phone, and started playing a random YouTube video that eventually fell asleep. I didn't know what time it was, but I awoke to the feeling of my bed shaking. I tend to ignore movements like this, because they happen often when my cat sleeps with me, as he has a habit of scratching his ear. But there was a pretty strong earthquake just the night before, so I assumed it was another one, making me open my eyes and look down at my cat to see which of the two it was. Indeed, he was scratching his ear. Oh, and there was my mom at the foot of my bed. Nothing out of the ordinary. She was probably checking on me before her and my dad went out for their 5 a.m. walk, as routine, and was bending down to pet the cat. I closed my eyes and was just about to slip back into slumber when my half-asleep brain realized that a number of other things were indeed out of the ordinary. With eyes that were barely open, I looked at my mom with blurred vision. The first thing I noticed was that she was wearing one of my high school t-shirts. My mom and I are far from the same size, and she doesn't have a history of borrowing my clothes. Weird, but not unsettling, right? Maybe she ran out of clean exercise shirts and decided to use one of mine. I then noticed that she was also wearing one of my high school t-shirts, but this one was wrapped around her head in a weird way that outlined the shape of it, not covering it, but just framing the profile. In my peripheral, I noticed that my closet doors were wide open. My mom always nagged me to close them because she said it wasted the cool air coming from the air conditioner, so I made sure to keep them closed whenever I wasn't getting ready. Another random realization hit me when my brain finally registered the fact that while my mom does pet my cat when she comes in to check on me, she's never bent down like the person in my room was doing. Looking back now, I don't think I've seen her bend like that since I was a kid. Keep in mind, all these thoughts flooded in my mind in about 5 seconds. Still, my half-asleep, half-stupid-as-fuck brain was more focused on why my mom was wearing my clothes, as opposed to all the things that were off in this whole entire situation. I sat up a bit and squinted my eyes so I could read the shirt, since there was writing on the back that would help me distinguish if it was actually mine, and not just that just basically looked like mine. That's when the person turned to look right at me before running out of my room, maintaining an ungodly crouching position that will be burned in their mind for the rest of my life. It wasn't until he was near the stairs that I fully processed what was happening. That person was not my mom. They weren't even a friggin' female. Instantly, I shot out of bed and instinctively wrapped my blanket around me to cover my nightclothes that suddenly felt so revealing. It was only then I began screaming. I hesitantly followed him out of my room and watched as he ran down the wooden stairs with deafening steps that echoed throughout the 3rd floor, almost drowning out my piercing cries. If I was going to get my parents' attention, who were sleeping on the other side of a closed door on the 2nd floor, I needed to be louder. I stood at the foot of the stairs and pushed my lungs to their limit. I could practically feel the capacity stretch inside my ribcage. After what felt like ages, but was probably only like another 5 seconds or so, my parents' door swung open. My mom ran up the stairs with a panic-stricken expression that I will never forget. She grabbed me by my shoulders and shouted, "What? What's wrong?" I turned to look at her with my mouth agape and brows furrowed in a mixture of confusion and disbelief. Had she not seen the man when he ran past her bedroom door? It all happened so fast. I wasn't sure if they had crossed paths or not. "Someone's in the house," I responded, with a voice that I honestly did not recognize. Without missing a beat, she wrapped her arms around me and ushered me down the stairs. "Grab the gun," she shouted, in the country's native language. We ran into my parents' bedroom, where my dad stood in the door with tired eyes and slept posture. I pushed him into the room and turned around to close the door, simultaneously filling with a light switch so we weren't in complete darkness. My movements were shaky and spastic, causing my fingers to fumble and flicker the lights on and off before eventually being able to lock the door. "What are you doing?" my dad asked with a soft laugh as he switched on the light after my attempts proved to be futile. I turned to him with the same incredulous expression in which I had when I was looking at my mother. He had been standing in the doorway to his room, in perfect view of the man running away, yet he seemed to be oblivious. "There's someone in the house," I repeated, watching his face instantly drop at my words. With the door now locked, I turned to my parents and watched them silently, waiting for them to do something. For 19 years, they had taken care of me and catered to my every want and need. Now, there they stood, just as scared and defenseless as I was in that moment. They were just people. My dad, an infamous Type A personality, kept his focus on the floor, most likely processing the entire situation before deciding what to do next. My mom was the complete opposite. Her cell phone was in one hand, while the other hand was running through her hair so many times that I was sure strands were going to end up in between her fingers. "I can't call 911, it's not working." I took the phone from her and dialed it myself, bringing the phone up to my ear, only to hear the monotone voice say, "Sorry, your balance is too low to make this call. In this country, most of the phones are prepaid, so if you don't have money on your account, you can't make any calls or texts." However, my mom said she had added money to her account just a few hours earlier. I tried calling my aunt, who lives 8 hours away, and it worked. It was then that I figured out that they only use cell phones to call other cell phones, and you can only use landlines to call other landlines, aka 911. The only problem was that our landline was in the second floor hallway, a few feet from the other side of the door. Once I told my parents what our only option was, my mom opened the window and began shouting for help in her native language. Similar to a knee-jerk reaction, I instantly shut the window. "Don't do that. They'll know we're defenseless and they'll come back." At this time this happened, we had been in the room for about 40 minutes. I was convinced that they had left and then heard her screaming. They would come back since they know we were just sitting ducks. "Are you sure you saw someone? Maybe you're just dreaming," my dad said, this being his first string of words since barricading ourselves. "How could he have gotten in? The door has 2 locks and a heavy pull against it." "No, I know what I saw," I answered without hesitation, but my brain started dissecting the possibility of a figure simply being a figment of my imagination. The sounds and movements he made were so vivid, but the situation as a whole seemed too surreal. There was no way someone could get inside with that pole acting as a shield, and neither of my parents had seen the man either. Internally, even I wasn't 100% sure of myself, but on the outside, I stuck to my guns. "I saw a man." "Okay, then we need to get out of this room and call the police," my dad said restlessly. My overthinking got the best of me as I thought about us leaving the room. Were there more people? Were they waiting for us? Were they right outside the door? Or were they hiding and would spring out when we least expected it? Maybe they were still in our apartment, continuing to raid through our things, since they knew we were too scared to leave. Had they heard my mom screaming for help and came back? We searched the room for weapons to protect ourselves with, but we wouldn't find anything even remotely useful. What happened to my gun my mom was shouting for earlier, you ask? It never existed. She just said that's what the man would hopefully leave out of fear. So with half of a pair of broken scissors in my dad's hand and a small floor fan in my mom's hand, we prepared ourselves for whatever was on the other side of the door. My dad unlocked the door and swung it open swiftly, hoping to catch anyone off their guard. The complete silence mixed with the eerie yellow lighting coming from our hallway seemed like a scene in a horror movie. Straight ahead, we all noticed that the door to the second floor balcony was wide open, and the screen on the window next to it had been pried open. The first feeling to run through me was assurance of knowing that I wasn't crazy, and I hadn't made this all up. The second feeling to run through me was pure dread, knowing that I wasn't crazy, and I unfortunately wasn't making this up. We searched the second floor and found no one, and nothing that seemed out of the ordinary. We then moved on to the first floor, and found our pitcher of water dripping condensation on the kitchen table. My mom asked me if I had forgotten to put it back before I went to bed, but I distinctly remember only brushing my teeth. I knew I hadn't gotten it out. Our windows have the glass on the outside, and the screen on the inside, contradictory to typical American windows, and we saw the glass windows were wide open, and the screen had been pried with. However, both of the locks on our doors were bolted, and the pole was still in place. We figured that the man had initially attempted to come in by putting his hand through the small gap he made in the screen window, trying to reach for the door so that he could unlock it. However, I guess his calculations were off, and he couldn't make the distance. That's when he climbed up to the second floor, probably by scaling the apartment that construction workers had yet to finish, and did the same procedure to the balcony window. He was successful this time, because the distance is much shorter. We called 911 a total of 5 times, and it took them 45 to get to our apartment despite the fact that the police station is a 3-minute drive away. While waiting, my mom knocked all on the other apartments to let them know what was going on. Now, our complex consists of 4 apartments, but I like to say it's more like a paired home with 4 different sections. The first one is rented out to an online business company. The second is rented to a family who had just moved in that exact night. We're in the third, and the fourth had no tenants. Neither of them answered, probably because who would answer the door at 2:30 a.m.? The police eventually came and told us that someone had made a call earlier, saying that they heard a woman screaming for help, but they couldn't find the location of the screams. They searched the house, but found no one, and didn't even tell us how to file a report. Yeah, they were pretty fucking useless. The next day, my mom talked to the people at the first apartment, and they were obviously shaken up. They told her that they had heard her knocking, but it was company policy to not open the door from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. My mom moved on to apartment 2 and told them what happened. The man and his pregnant wife said they didn't hear anything, despite going to bed at 2 a.m. and having their windows open. I was somewhat skeptical because my scream was pretty loud, even giving my mom nightmares days after the incident, and all our windows and second-story door was open. There's another building just a few feet away, so sound resonates pretty loudly, making the construction booming, even behind closed doors. And my mother's screams that were loud enough for someone to call the police? I was highly doubtful they didn't hear anything with the first apartment. It made sense because they only used first floor and all the windows were closed due to the air conditioning being on. My mom told the couple to be wary of the construction workers because she believed they had decided to rob us after seeing that my dad was a foreigner, automatically assuming that we were rich or something like that. The man's face instantly dropped and his tone turned cold. My mom asked him for the landlord's number since the old number didn't work anymore, and he said he would give it to her after he visited her today since he didn't have it on him. It took him 4 days to finally give us the number, and he did so with what seemed like a sincere apology, saying sorry for taking so long and for what happened to us. That same day, we called the landlord and she seemed shocked, telling us that nothing like this has ever happened in any of our apartments before. However, my mother had talked to a tenant in the apartment building behind us, and she said that she knows of at least 3 people in her complex who have had their place broken into. Later, the maintenance man came to inspect our window, and we found out that the construction workers were hired because they're all members of the landlord's church, and the man who had just moved in with his wife is the bishop of their church. Before my mom could even bring up her theory, the maintenance man told her that he was convinced it was the construction workers. We kept realizing that things were missing over the course of the 2 weeks, like my backpack, sunglasses, money, jewelry, some stuff out of our storage room, etc. My phone was also taken. I assumed that he was crouching over my bed. He was trying to reach for both the phone and the charger, since it was probably laying on the wire or something like that. My laptop and camera were both sitting on my desk, next to my jewelry box, but he did not take them. My parents assume it's because he was going to take the heavier items when he was about to leave, so he wouldn't have to carry them around. However, I didn't see anything in his hands when he was running away from me, which makes me think that he either left other items by the door for easy exit, or there was someone else in the house, helping him. A few weird things. He only took 4 of my shirts, 2 of them being exactly the same. He also went into my cousin's room and stole her towel. Thankfully, she had gone home for the summer, so she wasn't around. But it almost seemed like as if the thief knew that. He went into her room and my room, but completely avoided my parents' room. I also couldn't get over the fact that he drank our water straight from the jug, which would have made sense since he climbed the second story. However, this country is notorious for being superstitious, and my mom said that thieves tend to leave water out because it makes the homeowners go into deep sleep. Something about the water resembling the calming waves of an ocean. I've never been one to believe in superstition, and thinks that's why I was able to wake up. Just a few hours after the incident, we decided that we're going to move back to the States. This wasn't the only occurrence affecting our decision, however, but it was the last straw that broke the camel's back. I'm just thankful that we came out all safe and nothing worse happened. I'm also incredibly grateful for my cat, since he's basically the hero for waking me up. In fact, my cousins are fighting over who'll get to keep him once we leave. Steve. This begins in the summer of 2015. I was freshly 17 years old and staying with my mother for a few months due to a change in custody. She's from a rural country town, and her neighborhood is one of the only ones for at least 20 minutes. I felt comfortable in the area, as I lived there for the majority of my youth, and because everyone knows everyone. I frequently walk, so it was routine to hear a honk and catch a friendly wave whenever a car drove by. These walks gave me time to speak to my online friends, escape my abusive household, and lose weight, as many self-conscious teenage girls do. I would aimlessly walk for hours at a time, and only return home when I was either called back by my mother or on the verge of heat exhaustion. However, today was different. I was maybe 30 minutes into my walk. My friends were on Skype. It was early in the afternoon, so not too hot, and just overall a nice day. Now, I've been seeing the same man, Steve, for a few weeks now. He would never be outside the first time I made rounds, but whenever I walked back, he would always be there to greet me a smile. Steve was around my father's age, late 50s, and overall just seemed nice. I never thought anything of this because, as I said, I grew up here, and it's Louisiana, so Southern hospitality is a custom. As per usual, Steve was there today. He smiled, I smiled back, and continued on my way. I made a few more rounds before I saw a truck coming in my direction. Well, directly at me. Keep in mind that I was on the side of the road, so I practically jumped over into someone's yard to avoid being hit, and in the driver's seat was Steve. He made direct eye contact with me, and I swear he was smiling. I brushed it off as a joke, but felt uneasy, so went home. This is when strange things began to happen. The area I'm in is notorious for drugs. It's so regular, you can practically hear about a meth lab blowing up every other week. My neighbor at the time, Tim, had recently gotten out for prison for none other than drugs. I remember seeing him here and there with his mom when I was younger, but he only moved into the neighborhood after his mom died. He was poor, and my mother, shitty parent but generous person, decided to help him out. She would leave him food in an outside fridge, let him use our ponds to fish, and provide overall companionship. He was honestly a really nice guy, but a little messy, so when we began finding food wrappers in the yard, we just assumed it was him. My mother cleaned them up at first, but after a few days, she'd had enough. She was getting pissed at this point, because she's helping this guy out, and it seemed like he was just trashing her yard. My mom confronted Tim, and he swore it wasn't him. At first no one believed him, but after he went out of town for a few days and raptors kept appearing, we knew he was telling the truth. I had stopped walking for a few days because my mother didn't want me out alone. I was mad about it at first, but didn't protest because I couldn't shake the feeling of something being wrong. Honestly, it felt like I was being watched. I was so scared, I began sleeping with a small light on. This, I think, made things worse. You see, we don't have curtains. I never had them growing up. My house is pretty far back from the road, and each house is divided by a dense set of trees, so we never even thought to use them. This is when we began noticing more unusual occurrences. My house was lined with plants and bushes, so when they began to look stepped on, my mother and I were notably freaked out. We thought that maybe it was an animal, but the only place that would be damaged would be directly in front of the windows. We became more self-aware that's when we noticed that if a room light is on at night, anyone outside of the house has a clear view inside. We also noticed that the most disturbed plant was the one looking into the bathroom. The next day, we bought curtains for every room except mine. My room has a small one window about 8 feet off the ground. The house is raised, so it just didn't feel necessary. I was missing my friends after these few days of completely ghosting everyone, so I made a deal with my mom. I can go out if I can take my dog. My dog is a mini Aussie, so I'm not sure why. That provided both my mother and I some sense of security, but nevertheless it did. I guess we thought that someone would be less likely to bother a girl with a dog. Stupid, I know, but at the time it made sense. I made my first round, and to my surprise, I see Steve. It's unusual to bump into him on the first lap, and following the trend of peculiarity, he calls me over. I had never spoken with him before, but I'd seen him so many times, it felt like I could trust him, so without even thinking, I approached him. I took an earbud out. My friend's still on the line. You know, my mom has a dog exactly like that one, but bigger. Ozzy, yeah? Steve asked, friendly as per usual. Oh wow, that's cool. Yeah, she's a mini. Well, I'd love to know I can take a photo of her for my mom. Would that be okay? I think this is a little strange, but didn't think too much of it. Of course, I don't see any issues in that. Steve takes out his phone and begins to photograph what I assume is my dog. I'm focused on my phone, updating my friends in the chat of what's going on, and honestly don't pay any attention to him. After he is done, he carries on small talk. He asks my dog's name, her age, then goes off on tangents about whatever. I keep attempting to end the conversation, but he just keeps talking over me. This has to be going on for way too long, roughly 15 minutes, and I'm starting to feel very uncomfortable, so I tell him my mom is expecting me back and I leave. Upon return, I immediately tell my mom what happened. She scolds me for not watching him while he was taking pictures, and then tells me to be more self-aware next time. Since I didn't get to talk to my friends much in the day, I stayed up pretty late texting. This had become the habit, but the difference this time was my mom allowed it, so I could be in the living room and watch TV. Our living room is more of a sunroom. 2 of the 4 walls are all window, and that night, I completely forgot to draw the curtains. I watched TV until about 4 a.m. in the morning. Before finally heading to bed, I shut the TV off, went to my room, got undressed, then crawled under the covers. My usual small light was on and, funny enough, it was the only thing that made me feel safe. The next morning, I was awoken by my mother screaming at me. I assumed this was because it was Sunday morning and we had church, but no. She was questioning why there was a chair outside of my window. The moment I realized what she was saying, my heart dropped. The next thing we did was to call the police. The cop accused me of sneaking out. My room window doesn't even open, so that would be impossible, but he assured my mom I'm not telling the truth. After incriminating me and doing absolutely nothing, he left. The church used as part of an outdoor dining set. These chairs are insanely heavy, so how someone moved it without any noise is still a mystery to me. That day we skipped church and got my room curtains. I stopped walking, the summer ended, and custody was given back to my father. My mother moved out of state but still kept the child at home and would visit ever so often. I was still in Louisiana, but in the neighboring city, so I felt pretty safe. My mother and I didn't keep in touch. I saw her on all the major holidays, but then a sexual abuse case was opened with my father in the spring of 2016, so I was put back in my mother's care. We didn't know if this was permanent. Custody is a tricky thing, so until she was given documented custody, we stayed at my childhood home. Things escalated quickly. 2 days after my return, I began hearing things at night. I'm not talking about sticks breaking or leaves rustling, no. The back door, the doorknob, was moving. At first, I thought it was my imagination, maybe I was just being paranoid, but it kept happening. Every night at around 3 a.m., the doorknob moves. I was wondering why? If someone wants to break in, why try now? This house is vacant 99% of the time. It didn't even sound like it was trying to get in. It was actually subtle at first, just a little enough to grab my attention. Then on the 5th consecutive night, it was freaking loud. It was more of a banging than a rattling, so I told my mother the next morning. My room is the closest to the back door, then comes my sister's and then my mom's, all the way in the front. When I tell her I've been hearing things, my sister chimes in that she had too, but only the previous night. My mom immediately asks why we didn't tell her, but we both just wanted to think that it was our imaginations. My sister was around 10 years old at the time and had no knowledge of the prior occurrences, so my mom pulled me to the side and asked me if I remember Steve. I, of course, told her I do, and she tells me he spoke to her. She was visiting from Texas sometime in February, unloading groceries, when a truck passed, backed up, and pulled into the front driveway. There were 2 men in the car, a male in his early 30s and Steve. Steve gets out and asks my mom if she has a daughter. My mom tells her yes, too, and then he asks about a dog. She tells him, again, that yes, we have a dog, and he begins to tell her about me. He goes on about how pretty and kind I am, and how he really enjoyed seeing me last summer. He didn't specify which daughter because I never told him my name, so my mom asks who he's talking about, and he tells her, pretty, long blonde hair, young, 12 or 13, always walks your dog. My mother realized he was talking about me, and informs him that I am in fact 17, and she described him as appearing upset. He then goes on to tell my mom about how my dog wandered into his house on Christmas Day. My dog is a baby. She won't leave the front yard without someone she trusts, so immediately, my mom knew this was bullshit, and she tells him she needs to take the groceries inside. That ended her encounter, but opened a few concerns. Why did he know where I live, and why was he thinking about me for over 8 months? I am freaked out with his news, and especially considering what's currently going on. We send my sisters to my grandparents for the next few nights, and my mom calls Tim. She asks if he's seen anything, and he tells us no, that he hasn't been at home for the past few nights, but that is probably just tweakers trying to scare women. I don't buy it, because if it was, why be so quiet with it at first? They had done this to another woman in the neighborhood, but it was at 9 p.m., when she would have been awake to hear it. That was only when I was away. My mom and I stayed up watching the house that night. We were in the back room and planned to take shifts, but both were out by 2. The next day, we carried on as usual, both in our own rooms, but were asleep too early to notice anything. I was actually feeling a little better now, but to be sure everything was okay, my mom set out flour on the back patio of our track footprints. She read this in a Nancy Drew book when she was younger, so thought it was a perfect time to test it out. I felt stupid now. I was positive that my mind was playing tricks due to all the stress that I was under, so I stayed up on the phone that night. The next morning, directly outside of the back door was footprints. I didn't even hear anything, which made it even more creepy. He came up, did hell knows what, turned around and left. Police were called, and yet again, nothing could be done. They actually walked right through the footprints. The next day, my mom had temporary custody papers, so we got the hell out of there. I've been back since, and everything seemed normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Crazy Grindr penis activist follows me around town. I'm a male in my 20s, and I use Grindr along with the similar LGBT apps to make meaningful connections with people and to survey the candidates in my area. Hookup apps, or dating apps in general, are a powerful tool for minority groups in an oppressive world, no doubt, but just like any other tool, they can be abused. Grindr is no exception. While most popular and most effective, it is considered for good reason to be the trashiest of these apps. I got a message one day from an unremarkable guy, going by Josh in the app. When I say unremarkable, I'm being very diplomatic. I'm not a vain or materialistic person by any means, but I'm still human, and listen to my natural cues as to what I like, and simply what I don't. So, he was lucky I responded at all. Immediately Josh demanded, "Are you circumcised?" This is a very assertive question, and at the very least, not one you'd ask someone right off the bat, just like you wouldn't inquire about signs or what shape someone's nipples are. Could you imagine if someone just approached you and said, "Hey, so are your nipples perky and taut, or like soft and wide? Oh, and also hello." Obviously, this person was without a full deck of cards, but that didn't stop him trying to turn the tables when I, despite my better judgment, responded with an honest answer. I told him that I love myself and everything that life has me to be, naturally occurring or otherwise, and then reinforced the retort with a rather convincing visual reference, if you catch my drift, because I wanted to put him in his place. I'm not going to bother saying this was foolish in retrospect, because I'm an adult, was well aware of my decisions at the time, and even to this day, I don't regret my choice. You see, I'm very defiant. I live in what often seems to be an incorrigibly stupid world, and I'm going to be assaulted and shamed by the questionnaire of an invasive, entitled little brat with delusions of grandeur, doesn't understand internalized discrimination and prejudice is the last thing the LGBT community or any minority group needs. That I'm putting my foot down, and let's just say it's a big damn foot. However, the events that followed were nothing my foot could have predicted. He instantly replied, practically as fast as a bot, with, "Oh, that's a shame," and proceeded to fire off a violent monologue of body-shaming rhetoric, like, the 20,000 nerve endings you lost could wrap around a building, the amount of skin you lost is the size of an index card, and it must suck to be mutilated, I'm so sorry for you, etc. He went on and on and on. Clearly I was correct to peg him the way I did, but I can't say it was very rewarding. It rarely is in the scenario. I've done my paper and context and necessary before I move forward. This person, like many people nowadays, was regurgitating an estimate Paul Fleece, calling using a 1932 paper written by Henry Bassett. The problem with this commonly used figure is that, well, it's false, because it's public knowledge that Fleece warped the data cited in the paper itself, which lacked the control and other crucial specifications to further his viewpoints. Of course, Josh used it anyway, because that's what people do. They look at the first couple entries on Google, or maybe view a marathon of controversial YouTube videos, and suddenly they're fit to diagnose or prescribe medical advice. In fact, they're in the right. They're unassailable. No other perspectives are legitimate, and no cross-comparison is necessary to draw a definite conclusion. This is part of having low integrative complexity and processing information in ways that, well, inferior and a hallmark of extremism. I told him off and blocked him. Unfortunately, it does not end there. Mr. One-Tracked Mind circumvented the block easily by making another account. You might as well not even bother wasting your limited allowance of blocks on those who are willing to create countless accounts to accomplish whatever their mission is. In his case, apparently, it was creating, I kid you not, an entire profile dedicated to calling out circumcised guys. Remember, this is a hookup app. He messaged me again from an abomination littered with shady links leading to pseudoscience holistic parenting blogs and declared he was privileged for not being circumcised and that I was petty and in denial for, you guessed it, being circumcised. After an admittedly heated exchange, I can only tolerate so much stupid, I blocked him again, but it doesn't end there either. Very uncoincidentally, I started receiving anonymous messages with choice verbiage on my casual social media. That is, the profiles that are strictly separate from my dating profiles. He should have no way to find me anywhere, since no sensitive information was exchanged between us. But when there's a will, there's a way, and he must have found a lead somehow. That, or a staff member from the Grindr itself, exposed my personal details to this person, and outrageous stats, but it would not surprise me. The extent of corruption and propaganda run deep, far deeper than most are willing to accept, and there are ads displayed on these hookup apps that milk this topic and tend to err on the side of people like him, companies which are known to mislead American guys into believing they are sexually inadequate for a profit have advertised on Grindr and similar hookup apps, just like certain organizations have powered massive floats in Pride March with very inflammatory messages and promote fraudulent penis products at Pride Fest. The messages range from nasty to extremely disconcerting. At first, I was being called mutilated and whatnot, the bread and butter hate slur of these people, along with how they tend to call themselves intact, putting millions of guys in the category of castrated dogs. It got worse. It progressed to rapid anti-Semitism, as this argument often does, and he wished all circumcised men to death via gas chambers and being burned alive, saying, "Cut fucker needs to be gassed, and someday you and the last of your wretched culture will die off." This is depraved. But it's still discrimination, just free speech after all. I was only considering involving the police when he said he wished he could inflict a slow, agonizing, and richly deserving torture on me personally, and then started to talk about children in a way I can't even detail here. Suffice to say, it was pedophilic, and a cause for concern. The online interaction seemed to be the height of it, until I was eventually approached by someone I had never seen before in my local gym. He was a tall and overly muscular dark-skinned male. For reference, despite a prior comment, I'm a redhead, recovering anorexic, so the contrast was uncanny and was already attracting some attention, but unfortunately, it was not enough to prevent what happened next. With a disarming smile, he mentioned one of my interactions with Josh. I slowly rose from the machine. This was Josh. Josh, who had never once been forthcoming or honest from the start. Not about his deranged penis politics, and not about his profile picture either. Before I could distance myself, he pointed in my face and grumbled, "I'm gonna hurt you. I'm gonna hurt you real bad," and then walked away like nothing happened, returning to one of the circus lifts. I was stunned. He had recognized me from my profile picture, stalked me well enough to know approximately when I used the gym every other day, signed up as a guest, and waited for me to get comfortable, just to threaten me like that. I gathered myself, walked as casually as I could towards the front of the gym, and had the staff call the police when I identified him on the surveillance footage in a private admin room. They provided me his full name from a guest sign-in list, and he was banned from the gym. I then visited the precinct myself to file a report, but instead of being sympathetic towards what had just happened, they reprimanded me for not staying at the site of the incidents, and effectively did jack shit to help me, even with security footage at their disposal showing him confronting me, completely and utterly useless cops. No need to mince words. In the coming days, camera signs around my place of residence installed as a deterrent were removed and placed elsewhere. One found its way from its prominent spot on the front of the home to behind the garage on the other side of the property, and no, it was clearly not an animal. When I finally mustered up the courage to return to the police, they couldn't do anything to help because footage had not been captured, and they were no less skeptical of my complaints. We only had the cameras installed after the signs. Bear in mind that this random guy, Josh, latched onto me after I graciously answered his obtrusive question, and it escalated from schoolyard taunts into hate speech, credible threats of violence, a public confrontation, and then possibly into trespassing and vandalism. So much for that human rights claim, right? Sometimes people with dense emotional baggage hurl it onto other people, as opposed to addressing their own feelings. This is called projection. I think it's possible that super foreskin man, tall, tan, and ugly for whatever reason, feels very small, hence his materialistic need to make others feel small, and may have had more dangerous skeletons in the closet. Thankfully, I hadn't heard from him or his various things well over a year now and haven't seen him either. So, if you encounter someone like this, be wary, because people who call guys mutilated so as to associate horrific things like rape, murder, and torture with perfectly able-bodied people, thereby showing a lax concept of true acts of barbarity, are severely delusional and do not have you or their children's best interests at heart, no matter what claim they make or what guise of civility they use when not. Say, blatantly harassing guys on Grindr. Be extra careful online. There is documentation which suggests there are countless fake profiles out there, manned by people like Josh, which impersonate either medical professionals, parents, or normal guys to lure in those who do not know better, new parents included. An old man who is characterized by a scruffy complexion and blood-stained pants has earned himself quite the reputation for his extremism, but is nonetheless commended by privately and mysteriously funded nonprofits whose goal is to completely purify America. Solicited new pictures of children from a mother on Facebook. Let that sink in. It is also true that this man drove 900 miles to confront a nurse physically at her workplace over a Facebook post she had made pertaining to medicine. Another activist known for wearing a black shirt and beret was barred from Canada Pride March for exposing himself publicly to families for the purpose of anatomy education and runs an organization with a name implying that circumcised guys physically can't masturbate or use their equipment at all. Now he continues to engage in this behavior behind tents set up in the street. What could have happened in these situations if they were left to escalate is unknown, and ramifications have been dealt, but these people largely run free doing their thing amongst others they have inspired under this euphemism of activism. That's the only reason I've had to deal with Josh, and might have to deal with him again in the future. Make no mistake, something monstrous lurks behind that thin veil, and anything awful could happen at any time. Remember the fictional character Hannibal Lecter? Well, he spoke in a manner that was endearing, and adept with the rhetoric himself. But that doesn't mean you want to partake in the agenda underneath. Intellectual property of @Lehind, TBH writing pencil on Instagram. This is not a promotion, but to provide veracity of the story. If one were to message me on Instagram, I would verify that these events, which traumatize me to my core, are 100% non-fictional. I hope you never have to deal with someone like this yourselves.